Well, hello, and welcome back to this daily devotion, this daily message during Holy Week, and as we've been studying through it, I hope you're finding these um, helpful. I appreciate the comments that I've been hearing on this, and you're so gracious, and I just hope though that this is accomplishing the goal of maybe bringing a lot of this that you're familiar with, a lot of this that you've had before into focus, and then putting it together chronologically how you can see how all of this works and those things that Jesus was trying to teach us there in that last week. And so today we're going to look back. We're going to be primarily looking in Mark chapter 14. Mark chapter 14, we're going to just look at those first 11 verses or so. Because uh, this is we take on what happens there on Wednesday because and the great teaching. This is one of those rich passages, and I hope I just don't go too long because it is so rich, and we can there's so much we can glean out of it because God has made us free. Um, we have the ability to choose the path of light that leads to life, or we can choose the path of darkness that leads to death. And so, how do we respond? How do we respond to Jesus's message and what he did? Specifically, how do we respond to the death and resurrection? And that's what we're looking at here. And that's what this passage that we're looking at covers, because you had the chief priests and scribes on one hand. Okay, you had the chief priests and scribes on one hand, and you had Judas on the other. So those first couple of verses talk about the chief priests and scribes. Those last couple of verses that we looked at, 10 and 11, they're going to talk about Judas. And and both of those groups, the priest and Judas, was plotting. They were preparing for Jesus's death by planning to kill him. They were actively working to planning to kill him. Now, sandwiched in between these two parts in this passage, sandwiched in between these two parts is an account of the story of a woman who pours ointment on Jesus, and how beautiful it is. Jesus, they're at a dinner party, and she comes in and pours ointment and anoints him with that. Now, Mark kind of brackets this story um, as a way of just kind of calling us to the contrast, to the difference in the two groups here. All the scheming of the chief priest and teachers of the law, um, the betrayal of Judas, and the just the ugliness of sinful choices, of choosing darkness rather than light, of choosing death rather than life, and then sandwiched in here you have this anointing of Jesus that portrays the beauty of devotion. It portrays the beauty of worship. Um, just that beauty of pure, extravagant love that's poured out on Jesus, broken and poured out, just like our friend Ruth sang just a couple of weeks ago. And that's what it is. So you've got hatred, you've got love, you've got darkness, you've got light, you've got good, you've got evil, you've got beauty, and you've got betrayal. It's all here in this Wednesday story of Jesus's last week. And as we look at the words and the deeds um, um, and the attitudes in this passage, they kind of serve as kind of a mirror that reflect the choices that even today we make in response to Jesus and his message. Three things that I want to throw out here real quick. First of all, we have the choice to resist Jesus. In those first two verses, that's what it talks about there. Those first two verses simply said, After 2 days, it was the Passover and the festival of unleavened bread, and the chief priest and the scribes were looking for a treacherous way to arrest and to kill him, not during the festival, they said, or there might be rioting among the people. And so you've got the chief priests and the scribes, and they're reacting to Jesus with hostility. They're rejecting him outright, both him and his message. They're just throwing it away, and the rejection was largely based on fear, and envy. They saw Jesus as a threat. And they just said, hey, if we don't silence this guy, if we don't do it, what's going to happen to us? His message is too disturbing. It's too unsettling. And he's turning the world upside down, as later we read over in Acts. And the talk of God's kingdom and all of this. And he invites sinners. Oh, goodness, he invites sinners into God's kingdom, and he forgives the unforgivable, and he's not respecting our traditions, and so he's got to go. He's got to go. And they're seeking mostly to protect their position, and their power and their influence, and probably their lifestyle. They probably live pretty well there as well. And so so we look, Jesus is a threat to many, because there's a lot of people that they find his message and what he teaches just too radical. How many times have you heard it's too Jesus's teachings and Christians? You're too uncompromising. Okay. Your message demands too much of us. You're talking about dying to ourselves and and surrendering our lives and our ways to Jesus, and that's just too much. That's just too much. And now, why people would want to resist Jesus is really one of the great mysteries of our depravity. It is desperate. We are. We still hold on to that futile hope that that we can save ourselves, when deep down we really know we're on a sinking ship. Okay, we know this is going down, but our pride keeps us holding on to this false hope, and really it's beyond comprehension that we would resist God's love and God's grace, which he so willingly lavishes and pours out upon us, and in order to free us from ourselves, really to free us from ourselves, and to liberate us, so that we can live the kind of life that God intends. He loved us so much that he gave his life for us. So if he loves us that much, you think that we can trust him with our life and the very life that he intends for us. But the reality is that we still, in our own depravity, try to reject it and turn it around. But God still respects our freedom, and he gives us what we desire. If we're going to choose that way, he'll give it to us. A Rowan preacher wrote that if we want isolation, despair, and the right to be our own God, God graciously grants us that option. If we want nothing to do with love, we are given a reality free from love. But if, however, we crave light, we're drawn to the truth, we're desperate for grace, and we've come to the end of our plots and schemes, and we want someone else's path. And God gives us what we want. And that's the contrast there. Second thing is we have the choice to use Jesus. Now that's at the end. That's verses 10 and 11 there, that says, then Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, went to the chief priest to hand him over to them. And when they heard this, they were glad and promised to give him silver. So he started looking for a good opportunity to betray him. And So you got people and other people too, but they're like Judas. What it is, they pretend friendship. They pretend friendship with Jesus, but in fact they betray him. Um, Jesus, I mean, think about Judas. I mean, Judas never lifted a sword to strike Jesus. But his disloyalty, his kiss of betrayal, was as deadly as any sword or club or any other weapon. And Judas attached himself to Jesus, not to become a follower of Jesus, um, and not to become a follower of his message and his teachings, but to use Jesus to work out what he wanted him to be. Judas wanted Jesus to be what he wanted him to be, and not what Jesus wanted to be. And of course, then what makes Judas's betrayal all the more heartbreaking, if you've ever been there, yeah, is that he, as it says there in verse 10, one of the 12. He was one of Jesus's closest followers, one of the 12. Um, Now, as we read this about this event, both Luke and John say that the devil entered into Judas. And in essence, however you want to look at that is, because the essence of sin is pride. Think about it. The core of sin is independence. It's all about me. I want to be on my own. I want to be able to do that. And because the heart of sin is us wanting to do what we like and not what God likes. In other words, we don't want Him to be our God. We want to be in control ourselves, and that's what the devil, that's what Satan, that's what the evil one stands for. He stands for everything that's against God, and he's not going to bow to Him. And see, that's the kind of spirit that resides in Judas. But also we have to remember our own fallen nature, and that spirit can reside in us as well. And so that's why we have to die to self. Exactly what Paul tried to teach us. Now, even though Mark doesn't speculate as to why Judas betrayed Jesus. Mostly there's some evidence that looks at a couple of different motives. One, some say that he was just a disillusioned disciple, and that what he was wanting to do was force Jesus' hand. He wanted to ignite the fires of revolution, I guess you might say, and maybe he just wanted to wow the crowds and to bring to force this on in and bring everybody into the kingdom of God and stuff, and that was his primary motive on it. Of course, the other thing, maybe maybe his motives aren't that, but maybe we try to read too much into it. Some folks do, but maybe Judas was just simply greedy. Maybe he was just simply greedy. He did receive some money for portraying Jesus, and he had done a lot of things. The point is this: whether he was some disillusioned disciple trying to force a revolution, or whether he was just a greedy opportunist on it, here's the bottom line: Jesus was not his Lord. Jesus and his followers and all of them were just someone to further his own ambitions and his own goals, whether they be for power or they be for money or whatever. That's the bottom line. Jesus was not his Lord. Now, before you pass a lot of judgment on old Judas, do not people do that today? Okay? Judas wasn't the last person to use God for his or own purposes. Okay? There are all over today, there's obviously religious scammers out there. Okay? And sometimes they're just too easy to spot. Most of them have lots of hair and shiny white teeth and stuff, but there's even those that have more subtle attempts than that, and they want to go about using God for their own ambitions and their own goals. And think about it. Do we get to thinking of Jesus as only a miracle worker and kind of a quick fixer upper? Someone we can call and say, "Hey, I can get this taken care of pretty quick," and to do it. And I heard it said sometimes that he might be a salvation handyman. Who's on call in emergencies. Bless me, Lord, I need you now. How many do you know that during times of crisis, during times of need, they're all about praying. They're all about studying. They'll get in there, they'll read their Bible, they'll come to church, they'll be everywhere. But as soon as things start doing better, well, I've done that. I've pulled myself up by the bootstraps, and here I go to do that. But I always think too, one of the really amazing things about that is that God oftentimes looks beyond us using Him and blesses us in spite of our self-centered intentions. And we just always have to remember it's God that's worthy of worship, and He's worthy of devotion. And when life is going well, He's worthy of our worship and our devotion. When our ship comes in, when the job is great, when we're all healthy and happy, when the bills are all paid and the kids are doing great in school and all of those things, you know what? He's still worthy of our worship. He's still worthy of our devotion and our following Him, regardless of where He's at. And then finally, we read here about choices is the choice to follow Jesus. And that's the choice. Now, that's that third response that we see here. And that, of course, is about the woman, the unnamed woman who anointed Jesus in Bethany. And her response, her choice that she makes is it just demonstrated the beauty and the goodness of uncalculated, spontaneous love that she just needed to pour out. Okay, she left no name. The only thing we know about this woman is just of the beautiful deed that she did. Now, the setting here is in the house of Simon. Simon is a leper, or a former leper, I guess. And the woman who anoints Jesus is not identified. Okay, John talks about a Mary of Bethany. This is not her. Okay, Luke talks about a sinful woman. This is not her. But it's totally anonymous. Totally anonymous, because that's what the scripture says here in verse 3. While he was at Bethany at the house of Simon, who had a serious skin disease, he was reclining at the table, and all it says here is a woman came with an alabaster jar of pure and expensive fragrant oil of nard, and she broke the jar and poured it on his head. But some were expressing indignation to one another. Why has this fragrant oil been wasted? For this oil might have been sold for more than 300 denarii and given to the poor. And they began to scold her. Then Jesus said, "Leave her alone. Why are you bothering her? She's done a noble thing for me. You always have the poor with you, but you can do good for them whenever you want, but you will not always have me. She has done what she could, and she's anointed my body in advance for burial. I assure you, whatever the gospel is proclaimed in the whole world, what this woman has done will also be told in memory of her." What a beautiful, wonderful passage that really I don't overlook. And just this simple woman says, a woman come with an alabaster jar. and what it contained was an oil that was extracted from the nard plant, and it was native to India. Now understand what's going on here. She brings this jar of very expensive oils. It was imported. Okay, it was imported, and it was very costly. And matter of fact, it says here there was more than 300 denarii. 300 denarii. Then that was more than a year's wages for an average or rural laborer in that day. If you want to translate it probably and put it in today's terms, it's probably worth about $25,000 to $35,000. $25,000 to $35,000. Put that. Maybe you can relate to that a little bit. And it was used. What this oil of nard was used was for both perfume. For perfume, for the head and the hair and stuff. And they also used it to anoint the dead. And so it's here that we see both the beauty of love and of death, but not just any death. This is the death of Jesus, which we know is going to lead to the resurrection. And of course, now she was criticized. Go figure. She was criticized there by the disciples, and she was praised by Jesus because what he said, she's done a beautiful thing for me. And the word for beautiful here is kalos. Okay, and it can mean good, it can mean beautiful, it can mean aesthetically pleasing. But in this context, it's even more than that, because what she does is praiseworthy. It's praiseworthy because it's timely. And the beauty of her extravagance and apparently wasteful gesture that she does is due to just particular situation. Jesus is about to die. Now, of all the disciples around, she's the one that gets it. She's the one that understands it. And another thing that makes this so admirable is Jesus said she did what she could. She did what she could. Now that expression is found only here in Mark, and in other words, she gave what she had. She gave what she had in her power to do, what she had in her abilities to do, and her act was timely because she invested herself in it. She turned herself into it, and her devotion to Jesus obviously was very extravagant. And because she could have sold that for a great cost, okay? She could have used it on herself, even. She could have used just part of it. But you know what she did? She broke the jar. That's all of it. She wasn't going to use some and save some. She couldn't pick some up and save it for later, okay? What she was doing is her decision was complete. Her decision was final. She broke the jar and she poured it on Jesus and even on herself. And the disciples criticized her that could have been put to better use. This could have been put to better use. And they get real pious there, don't they? We could have used this and sold it for the poor and stuff like that. They wanted to excuse themselves and sound very pure. They had no intention of helping the poor with that. Because if they were wanting to do that, they could have already been doing that. Because the poor was with them. They weren't going anywhere. Everything was there. Okay? And that's what Jesus said. You'll always have the poor. Okay? And basically what that just says, situation, the sinful ways on earth affect people in sinful ways. We wouldn't have all of those things if it weren't for sin. We live in a fallen world. And so Jesus saw through that, and that's why he told her, leave her alone. Don't criticize her. Okay? Don't give her a hard time. And what he's also telling his disciples again, don't jump on her. She gets it. She's got the right answer. She knows what this is about. She poured perfume on my body before to prepare for my burial. See, she already had it. And the disciples, they were still clueless. And the chief priest and the teachers of the law and Judas and everything, they weren't the only ones that had missed the mark, because even his closest disciples didn't understand the mission. And his whole mission was death and resurrection. That's why he came, to die and to be resurrected. And so that criticism doesn't hold weight. It doesn't hold weight. And so when you look at the chief priest and you look at Judas, uh, uh, they were preparing for Jesus' death one way, and but this woman was preparing another way. And what a contrast that it is. And what did Jesus say about her? Isn't that beautiful? Truly, I tell you, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her. We're still talking about that today. Clearly, people thought they've responded in a lot of ways to Jesus and his message over the years. Some resist Jesus, and some still do. Okay? Some have used Jesus for their own purposes, and some still do. Others have followed Jesus and laid out their life for him, and some still do. And for those that do that, they have found grace, and they understand his message of redemption, and they found hope that in his death and his resurrection. And that's what we celebrate. Look, life is about choices, and our choices have real consequences. And so let me just ask you, what choice have you made in response to Jesus? Which of those responses, what choice have you made? And what kind of choice, what kind of response is God moving in your life for you to make right now? Think about that as you go throughout this day. Thank you for listening, and thank you for, and tune in tomorrow as we look at what happens on Thursday.